Hello and welcome back. Pat the Sound Guy here again. We've got Mr. Green Monster still on the bench. He's looking a little naked. Torn him down a whole bunch. I was in a hurry the other day, so I started tearing them apart. So we didn't really get a chance to video the whole thing, but we'll show you, most of how to get it apart and a few little tricks here to get into the porting here. I've got the crank and piston here on the bench. I've got the flywheel and the clutch. I got the cylinder, the bottom of the crankcase here. And there's the intake adapter, carburetor mounts too. And the few tricks you need to know to get this thing apart. It's a T25 for most of the fasteners to get this off. Flywheel, to get that off is pretty simple. There's two ways you can get that off of there. Way number one is a piece of rope. Get your piston just below top dead center and jam a bunch of rope in there so you don't get in any ports. That's why you want to pull up blue ways. And then you crank the engine up a little bit to get it up so that locks the piston in place. And then you can take a regular socket and pull off the flywheel nut. And that same goes for the clutch as well. You need to do the rope trick for the clutch. And what you do with the flywheel once you have the nut off is you hold the flywheel like that. You put your nut back on just enough so you don't mash the top of the threads, and just hold the saw by the flywheel and give a few shots with the hammer. A good jerk. You have a brass hammer, that's better, but I haven't damaged one of these yet doing that. So that will eventually just weight of the saw holding that to give it a snap, and it'll pop that flywheel right off. Pull the nut off, there's your flywheel. The next thing you got to do is to get this cylinder out is to pull the clutch. Now there's a special tool for that, and of course I don't own one. I do own something that's close here on the bench, but yeah, it doesn't work really well. It was an idea I had to pick up this little guy, and it's for doing rear brakes, parking brake on a vehicle, and it kind of fits in there like the tool does, but it doesn't really work. So anyway, the way I've been doing them anyway, you take your screwdriver, you got your clutch inside of the engine, piston's locked with the rope. You can see the direction of off is a left-hand thread, so all you do is you put your flathead screwdriver on that lip, side of the saw, hold that in place, take your hammer and give that a few sharp whacks, and that will take that clutch right off. Problem solved. So that's part of getting this apart, and then you've got the bottom of the crankcase and the cylinder are all as one piece of the saw, so that goes in there, and then your cylinder is all inside the saw like this, so this guy is in here like so. So then you've got your clutch off and your flywheel off, and then your cylinder will come right out. But the only thing you got to do is pull the 4 bolts at the bottom of the saw, and they're of course down bottom here. Now, then you can just pull the whole cylinder right out. I had to do a lot of cleanup work in this guy because it was, as you've seen, it was very dirty, but it was just as dirty underneath everything, and this was all completely coated. So that took me another hour to get that all cleaned up this morning. Now, the other trick I had to do is there's these metal bushings that the bottom of the crankcase sits on. And what I do is I just take a socket that just fits the bottom of that, or a screwdriver, and that fits inside them, and I pop these back two out, because you're going to need those. They come up from the top here, so I just pop those through. You're going to need those in the 4 bolts that hold the bottom of the crankcase to the cylinder if you want to do the timing numbers to get at the porting at this. I did this a year ago, so I figured out all the little tricks with this particular saw. And not too many people port these, so there's not a lot of tricks. So you take your little 2 bushings and you put them, you know, wherever you want to put them. You can put them into the back and the front, or, you know, wherever you want to put them. I like to do kitty corner. And what you do is you put your bolts in when you put your crank assembly in. And you got to take a look at the way the witness marks go for the seals, and you can see how this went in. Flywheel side is the opposite side of the oil. Goes this way. I've taken the ring off, of course, so it makes this a little easier. Of course, this will all be together. Once you pull it apart, you can take the ring off and that sort of thing. There's our witness marks here. That's this here. Yep. You can see the 2 marks on the seals, crank seals, where they sit in those bottomless transfer ports, and this goes on like the bottom like that. And you put 2 of your bushings in here. And thread those in. And this makes it so you can get this on. You can hold this in a vise if you want, but this makes it so the whole bottom end stays together. And you should do this by hand, but, you know, for the sake of speed. There we go. And then we can thread these 2 in by hand and match the height of these other 2. Yes, here we go. And now you can set the little guy on the bench and he'll stay put. Now we have a cylinder. For our next trick, you go to the interwebs, the inner screen, and you look for a printable degree wheel. I've got a couple different ones I've made today. This is my original one I made, plastic plate. And then I have different sizes and things, and just different looking ones that I've been working with. And, you know, print them off in the printer. I got a laser printer in the house, and a little bit of spray adhesive or glue or whatever. I use spray adhesive, and just take a piece of cardboard. There's a piece of cardboard right there. And I have a drill chuck. You don't need a drill chuck, but this makes it a lot easier to do this. I had originally used a couple different washers and things on this crankshaft. Let's see if we can see this a little better. And what I had done was I just took my degree wheel and stuck it on there with a couple spacers and washers and the nut for the flywheel or the clutch, and then that put my degree wheel on there. But the drill chuck is definitely the way to go. So this was a little kind of weird to figure out to get the numbers of the port durations. This guy, you don't need to mess with any transfer ports or anything like that. This is a simple way to get some extra oomph out of one of these. I did the other one last year and it turned out just fabulous. The biggest deal with this stuff is not so much the numbers, you know, and the porting per se, is what I like to call port matching and then getting the right flow characteristics through some of the components. So if you look at this guy here, this is the adapter that the carburetor attaches to. So the carburetor attaches onto here. You can see our pulse ports. If you look inside that thing, it's as shiny as all get out. And if you didn't do anything else on this saw, if you just do these two things, you will get better performance from your saw. Because when you have a very shiny intake tract, like this is very shiny in there. You can see how it's shiny, shiny, shiny. And this cylinder, the intake port, is very, very, very smooth as well as shiny. You know, there's no real hang-ups in there, which is good. So there's nothing really to do there. But the fact that that's shiny is not good for your performance, because what you get is the fuel-air mixture will come out of suspension. The fuel will come out of the air-fuel mixture, and it will form droplets on these all components here in this tract. And that's not good, because what you get is you want the fuel to be in a gaseous state to get a better bang. And that's where you get your efficiency from. So if you take and just rough all these surfaces up with your Dremel, your rotary tool, whatever you have, you with a little stone on it, being careful not to go too crazy with it, but make it like a cat's tongue kind of rough texture on all this stuff. And you can see you can take out just those little ridge in there kind of thing, and then match this gasket a little better to this adapter, and just take this. You don't want to open this up too much, because it's a very small saw, and you want to keep the velocity up when the carb, you know, when you open that carburetor butterfly and is asking for flow, you want to keep the velocity up all the way through. So don't open this up anymore. It doesn't really need to be any bigger, because you're running the stock carbs, so you're not going to get much more than that. So you just want to take that little lip off of there, and anywhere the fuel can hang up. It's actually pretty good. I must say, this is pretty well designed for what it is. Just a cheap, supposed to be a throwaway saw. And then what you do is you take this all. We're going to take this all apart, of course, and you're going to rough this up with the stone as well in here. And if you did that, and then just polish the inside of the, like to a mirror finish, this nice shiny surface inside this exhaust port, or inside that exhaust metal adapter that's in there. If just do those couple things, that intake modification, but it's not really modification, just, you know, making a cat's tongue texture, will do a lot for how the saw functions. It'll work that much better. But if you really want the extra oomph out of it, then you want to change the timing numbers a little bit. And I've been looking at it, and no more than about 155 degrees duration for the intake and exhaust for most stuff like this. If you want something that's going to be a reliable piece of equipment. So that's what I'm probably going to do, is I'm probably going to go pretty tame on the numbers, maybe 5 degrees on the exhaust, another 5 degrees in the exhaust, and another 15 on the intake. And we'll go over that in a moment here. Now you can see we got the degree wheel mounted on here. Now we need a pointer. So we can just use a regular old piece of wire and find somewhere to attach it to. And earlier on, I was just wrapping the wire around the top of the cylinder through the fins, and it was working just fine. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to put one of these mounting fasteners back in on the intake, just to have a place to mount this on there that's going to be static. And what I've done is I've taken the, it's like I find on the bench, that's just an old piece of a tire valve sitting on here, and it'd be a great little spacer to attach this on and hold that piece of wire on there and hold that where we want it to be in place here. So that's going to be here. Put our rubber there. And presto. MIG wire works well for this, but I just got a roll spool mechanics wire sitting here. All right. So now we've got our degree wheel on, and we have a pointer. Quick and dirty way to time this to figure out what your durations are. There's also a reason why I made the degree wheel this size, so I can actually spin this around and look what I'm doing. Very handy. And what we want to do is, you can see that piston there, and you want to just have it so it's just cracked. So this is our intake timing. We want to check the duration of how long the intake stays open. Pretty simple. That's about how much you want, like a first crack kind of thing. You can see the base of that skirt of that piston. Then you look at our degree wheel, and how I like to do it is pretty quick and dirty. You hold that in place. I go to 180, because everybody says you got to count backwards from 180 anyway. So what I do is I go to 180, and then double check my pistons in the right spot. Both 50,000s, I guess, is about the amount you want it open, and I hold that in the right spot again. View it from there, and we zero that back on 180, and then we go through the whole, open the exhaust port, and it goes, so it goes up, or the intake port, and it goes up, piston goes up, piston goes back down, and we get it so it's just about the same as when we started the rotation of everything, and we look at our number. And from before, I know it was 40 was our number, so we can take 180 minus 40, and that gives us the 140 degrees of total intake time. So I used to do it a different way, but this is the fastest way I can come up with to do this. You know, it's quick and dirty, it's pretty simple, and I've spent the last hour here going through the numbers over and over again to double check, so I know that it's 140 duration of the intake port, and we'll do the same thing for the exhaust port, except we need the flashlight for that one. Take Mr. Flashlight, and put it in the spark plug hole, and crank it over so you just see what we call first kiss of light. So that's about where the light makes a smile, the full width of this port on the bottom. So it's about that there. And then we do the same thing. We hold on to our crankshaft, and then we zero our degree wheel at 180. And we double check our first ray of light again. Just move a little bit. You can do this while it's on the saw, but I already took it all apart to clean everything. So we just double check our 180 again. Make sure we get it at the right spot. And we double check our 180. And then we go through our direction of rotation. Piston goes down to the bottom, comes back up again. So that's our exhaust stroke. And here we go till we have just first ray of light again, and our wonderful smile. And our number is about 135, or what's our number comes to be about 30 or so. And let's just double check that again. First ray of light. And our number was 30 over here. So 180 take away 30 gives you 150. So those numbers aren't bad at all. That's why these things aren't horrible saws to begin with. So I would like the exhaust to be about 155. The intake would be about 155. You know, the intake and exhaust, I want to be about matching somewhere about there. And then you can give that a try. So what I'm going to do is we're going to get the tools ready for the port job and our job on that guy there. And what we're going to do is we're going to get ready and get all set up. We're going to grab the vacuum and the die grinder and the bits, and we'll get started once we have all our goodies together. Got my micro grinder on the go with a diamond bit in it, and we've got our adapter for the carburetor bolted up the cylinder again. As you can see, let's zoom in a little bit. you can see that little bit of restriction. That's not enough to really hurt much, but every bit counts when you're trying to get a little more out of these little tiny saws and things. So you see that little bit of the gasket there. We're going to match that a little bit. I'm not going to touch the size of this opening here at all because the carburetor fits it exactly. So I don't want to enlarge this at all. I don't want to change this size or shape or anything. I just want to take the little ledge off the outside of that. You can see up in here, up in the roof here. You can see that there. I'm going to take that little lip off, and I'm going to touch this up with the stone, the diamond a little bit, just to make that rough like a cat's tongue. What we're probably going to do is take this little lip out of here first from the outside, and then I'm going to go take this off again and match it. I need to take off of my intake port or the bottom skirt of my piston. I need to take off 3 millimeters, which is 15 degrees of duration. So basically that's 1 millimeter equals 5 degrees, which is good news because if you look at the other side, and you pull this insert out of the exhaust port, I've measured that little lip there, and that's approximately 1 millimeter. So what we're going to do with the exhaust port now is we're going to grab our carbide burrs, and we're going to just blend the bottom of this in so it doesn't have a drop. It just has a smooth transition into the exhaust port. And we'll just transition this over here and this over here, and then we'll take that top out, take the sides out, and then we'll polish, they get that smooth and polish it all with the polishing compound we got there and make this extremely shiny. It's pretty shiny as it is, but we're going to shine it right up like a mirror. And it's going to be amazing. What I have to do is I have to pull the piston pin out of the piston, and we are going to take this bit out of the piston here, and that is for our intake port timing. So I'm going to go grab the carbide burrs, we'll get on the exhaust port, and then we'll get onto that base of that piston skirt. So here I am. I'm back at the bench. It's been a couple of days since I shot the first part of the video. We've got the aftermath. Well, did I screw it up? I don't know yet. We'll find out when we put it together. But the numbers on this aren't too different from the last one of these I did last year. Just maybe a little further on the exhaust than I did in the other one, maybe by a little bit. So we've got an older cylinder for one of these, not ported, so you can see a kind of a before and after. So these are both the same cylinder, same model, just a little bit different series. I've got, this is the original equipment cylinder, and you can see how much that exhaust port is very restricted compared to what this one is here. my other hand. This one actually has at least 2 millimeters on the roof of that. It could be taken off. This one had about 1 millimeter. And I didn't have a chance to do this guy because it was part in the box when I got it last year. So I didn't have a chance to do the numbers on this one to measure between the two little bit different series. Like this, the other one was a bit newer than this one, but the same model, everything. But this one has some different numbers on it, I'm sure. So anyway, we've got stock exhaust port, ported exhaust port. So we can take the flashlight and we'll see this one should probably give you a better look than the other flashlight I was trying to use. You can see in there, I got everything blended real nice on the bottom of that, real nice in the roof. I took this to about 160 degrees, might be 5 degrees more than I was really looking for. I really wanted to get that 155 on the intake and the exhaust just for experimentation's sake. But it turned out really good. I got it polished fairly decently for what I have on hand. So it's very smooth, very, very shiny. I buffed it up with the buffing wheel in there as best I could. So it's very shiny. This isn't going to get run a ton. It's not a firewood saw or anything. So it's not going to get run a ton to get. And I run really lightweight oil. It doesn't leave a lot of carbon anyway. So this is running a very low oil ratio of, could even be 70 to 1 by the time you get going. Between 70 to 1 and 100 to 1 because of the oil I use, that Stens mix, which is Opti 2. You're using very little oil, so there's very little smoke, so very little ash, very little carbon deposits going to happen. And this had quite a bit of carbon in it anyway. Like the squish band was full of carbon. I cleaned all that out earlier, and the cylinder's been washed and everything. So next thing is we're going to go to the intake. So you've already seen the stock intake in the first video. So there's what the stock intake looks like. Nothing special. This one's a little rougher than this one was. This one was very shiny when you moved it. This one's almost a cat's tongue. So it's kind of neat to see the discrepancies between the cylinders, castings differences when they're almost exactly the same model and everything. So this guy, there's our ported intake. So I've done a little mod on the roof of that Iron Horse says is a great way to go. And you can see that in a lot of racing cylinders on dirt bikes and things like that are done like that with a little bit of extra hollowed out on the top of each corner. So that looks pretty good when you do that. And I took the 15 degrees, I did the change on the piston skirt on this one. Instead of trying to grind at that port for days and days and days, you can see how much I took off. So what I did was I put the piston in the cylinder, and before that I put Sharpie on there from layout die. And then I measured up how many degrees I wanted. I wanted that 15 degrees change from the bottom of the stroke, and took my pick and traced the port on that piston. And I was right on the money. It was actually the 15 degrees I wanted is how it turned out. It was really easy to do that in the piston. So that was pretty easy. What I did was I stuffed this with a rag and covered all this up and kind of taped it up a little bit, which is kind of dangerous. I wouldn't do that on a customer saw or anything like that, but where this is this is just for fun and experimentation. It's not going to run that much anyway, so I didn't get any chips in it. I was lucky, but it's not something you want to be doing, cutting something like that with it all together. But I said, by the time I pulled that snap ring out of there, circlip, I said, I don't need to pull the circlip out. I'm not gonna, because one of them's come loose after you've been messing with it a few times. It's not great, because I've seen engines like this where the clip comes out, if you don't get it quite back in right, or it's been used a few times, it just destroys the cylinder. So we don't want to do that. So that's everything's back together. It is a little worn. Like the end gap wasn't too horrible on the piston ring, but the piston ring is a little wore out. It's got a lot of play there, but it is what it is. It ran decently, and it would do probably pretty good in full-on wood. So, it is what it is. It's not a throwaway saw by any means. I don't like people say that because those are just junk. Those are just junk. It is what it is. If you don't take care of something like this, it's going to be junk. But if you take care of something like this, it'll last virtually forever. Unless you have something catastrophic, which can happen to any saw. It can happen to an MS-170, it can happen to a 660, it can happen to a 371 XP. It doesn't matter what saw it is, you can still have a catastrophic failure and have to fix it. But if you take care of them and you don't have a weird thing happen or an accidental thing happen or whatever, the saws are going to last. So as long as you keep them clean. This was really dirty, and I think if this had been cleaner, it would have worked better when it was newer. So it is one of those things. I hate when people call them a throwaway saw because they really aren't. People are using these to cut their firewood up. Like the other one of these, I gave it to my buddy Lyle to test out with his father. They were cutting firewood. They were falling trees with it and everything. They used probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 tanks of gas through it to break it in for me, the new cylinder. And they didn't want to give it back because it worked so good and they liked it. For it's light and it was cutting wood like mad. Who knew that something like that's going to be great? So a lot of people like these for that because they're lightweight and when you port them and mod them and do stuff, they're pretty decent saws. And in actuality, if you look at an MS-170 and you look at one of these in pieces, there isn't much difference. The cylinder is kind of similar, might be a little bit different numbers and things and how they're ported from the factory and things like that, but essentially they're the same idea. The MS-170, I think, might have a better cylinder inside. This has a chromed piston and a regular bare aluminum inside, magnesium or whatever it is, where the MS-170 might have the chrome nickel on the inside of the cylinder, where this doesn't. It might be the same idea. I'm not really sure because I haven't really had one apart too much. But the replacement cylinders for these, I just ordered one just a few minutes ago. It was $35 Canadian for a piston, 2 piston rings, the cylinder, and a couple of clips, circlips for the piston pin, and a new pin for the piston. I mean, as long as the bearings aren't messed up, and you can rebuild this saw for $35 and maybe a $5, $6, $7 for a tube of motor seal because you're going to need motor seal. We'll get into that in a second. And there's not too much else I needed for supplies for this. I mean, I did have to buy some new burrs, but that's neither here nor there. But if you want to port something like this, you're not talking a lot of money. I mean, I paid $20 for 10 carbide burrs on Amazon. I mean, that's not a lot of money to make something like this that much better. You can buy these diamond bits if you need. You don't really need them, but you can. A few extra bits and pieces. So, for about $50, you're into working on something like this. Very few hand tools needed, and you got something that's kind of fun to play with, but make something way more useful than it started out to be. So, I mean, for a free saw, I'm only into it for my time. I'm not sure if I would do something like this for a customer because of the time involved. It might not be worth it for me for a cheap saw like this. It depends on how I feel about it. I might charge someone a flat rate to say, if they know the saw works and you bring it in, I might charge them a flat rate that'd be agreeable to them to be what they want. If they want their saw to be better than it was and something because it was cool to port it, I might do it. Who knows? But depends what your time is worth to you. If you want to have some fun and experiment with something like this, this is a great hobby and a great thing to try. I mean, I used to do this with scooters, with the 2-stroke Hondas from the 80s, and that got kind of expensive after a while because you're trying to buy parts on eBay and you're used parts and old parts, and you can get new cylinders, but they weren't very good, and you're trying to machine them and make them fit, and you're trying big bore kits and all this stuff, and it gets really expensive real fast. But this kind of thing, you can go out and find one of these for free or $50 or whatever, very inexpensively. I said almost free, where this one was free. And for a small investment in some tuning bits and pieces and stuff, you got something you can play with. You got something that's viable, you can touch, you can go try it. And you don't have to worry about licensing and registration and when you have to go try it on the street or whatever. You just go find a logout back and play with it and give it a go. I think it's time to assemble this bad boy. So stand by, let's get it rocking. And here we are, we've got my oil can, and I'm going to go through and add a little bit of oil to all my different bearings here because these are very dry from being washed out and everything and sprayed with brake clean, and get a little bit of oil so we don't have a dry startup when we start this guy and try and get any oil in there. That's a lot quieter. That's a lot quieter with some oil in there. We'll get some oil in all of our bearings in here. This is crucial when you put a two-stroke together. Is a lot of oil everywhere it needs to be. So smoke a little bit when you start her up, but that's okay. It'll clear once you get her running. Seals are fine, so you don't need to worry about replacing them. You can see these are the witness marks that clear these transfer ports here, so that's good to know. Now the real fun part is going to get some oil on that piston and get this assembled in here. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take and put some oil in the cylinder right on here and right in here. We're going to coat that all with oil in here. Yeah, oil everywhere. We'll coat that all with oil. And the reason why we're going to do that, we're going to put that piston in there, and we don't want that to get scuffed up before we put it back, when we put it back together. Next, we're going to take a little bit of brake clean. I'm going to clean these surfaces here. There's no oil in these. Surfaces here go in here. Because next, how we're going to do this is this needs moto seal. There's different versions of this. This is the Permatex brand moto seal, like the stuff. It's easy for me to get. There's Honda Bond, Yamaha Bond, Suzuki Bond. You know, there's a, I can't remember what the actual brand name of the Bond stuff is. That's the original version, but it's a great product. It works very well, and it's impervious to gasoline. So this is what you used for bottom ends like this for base gasket deletes. So this didn't have a base gasket; it had moto seal from the factory, and it's impervious to gasoline. So that's what you put motorcycle cases back together with, or these kind of cases with back together. You can also use it for intake glue to glue your stuff back together, glue on your gaskets and things, and repair those. This is a gas maker for intakes because it's impervious to gasoline. Where don't use orange or black RTV to do this. The bottom end of your saw, the fuel will disintegrate it and turn it to like a half-eaten gummy bear. So don't do that. I want to line those witness marks back up again on those seals. There we go. Now the next step is this has to go into that gear in there. So the trick is you got to spin this as you get it in there. want that to be clean as possible on there. No oil on that. Supposed to be a nice friction fit. Some rope in there. Make sure it's not nothing gets into those transfer ports, and bang, there you go. There's a washer, and that is a spring washer. So it's cupped in one side. So you put the cup side down. Then we put our nut back on. Wire for the coil goes in here. There's a little metal clip that goes on there to hold it out of the way of the flywheel. We've got our little bag of tricks in here. And there's a little fella there. Keep everything in a bag. Little clip goes on there. Excellent. Got our coil here somewhere. Put a little bit of oil inside our bearings in here. $8,000s on that. Can't use a business card, but I'm deciding to use a feeler gauge for once because it's on the bench. Let's get this clutch put on. Got our rope. Make sure you crank this cylinder over a little bit so it's not going to get the rope caught in the transfer ports. And there you go. That rope locks that cylinder up. And we've got our clutch here. Now, before we put our clutch back on, we've got that washer goes first. And of course the clutch bell. Now, before we put this on, we are going to put a little grease in this guy. And for that, I like this high temperature silicone brake grease because it goes up to temperatures well above the operating temperature of this crankshaft. So we grab a little bit of this. Next thing we have to do next item on the agenda, we got to get that clutch on there. So first, again, we need our rope. Make sure we turn the piston so it's high enough to get the rope in there without getting caught in all the ports, because that's bad. I like to push the rope towards the front, so because the ports are on the side here, then all I have to do is just turn the engine up a little bit, the flywheel, and that locks that in place. We have our clutch. So this washer goes first, and of course you can see the little ridge on there that went on this part of the crankshaft there. We've got our clutch bell, and before we put the clutch bell on, I've cleaned it all with brake clean. Cleaned out the bearing in there. I'm going to grease it, the bearing, with a little bit of silicone brake grease, because the temperature ratings on this brake grease far surpasses just about anything else you can use. So I like to use this stuff on these bearings. So put a little bit of that in there. Crankshaft gets hot, so you don't want that to get melty. And maybe we'll put a little bit of brake grease on the back of there. Just a smidge. Next we have our clutch. We want to go the opposite of where it says off, because it's left-hand threads, so it's lefty-tighty, ready-loosey on this guy. Next, flathead screwdriver, Mr. Hammer, done. There's our clutch. It's not a naked carcass of a chainsaw anymore. It actually looks like one. We've got everything installed back in here. It's back together. We've tested it out a bit, warmed it up, tuned it a bit. I got the bar on there. I've double checked the rakers on the chain. The chain was already sharpened, but rakers need a little touching up. So it runs pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the results. I haven't really had a chance to try it in the wood that much yet. Just a couple of quick cuts and it's not too bad. It's got great throttle response. When you grab the throttle, it revs up real fast. It's not lazy at all. Seems like it was success. Now, the next trick is we got to get some real decent wood to test it in. Might have to visit my buddy Lyle, and we'll go visit a woodlot or something and try some actual decent sized pieces of wood to get this going in. Like I said, the other one of these that I did last year, it worked fantastic. They didn't want to give it back. It worked so well. You know, if you get one of these for free, it's worth, you know, maybe picking up some burrs and a rotary tool or a die grinder or something like that to making a degree wheel and going and trying this, because it's makes this thing a whole bunch better saw. I mean, it's not too heavy. It's, you know, it's kind of expendable. It's not expensive. I mean, this was a free saw. You can find them cheap online. So there you have it. There's a porting job done. Let's go and run it for a sec and see how it goes, and we'll come back. Oh yeah, we got her all warmed up. I did a bit of tuning. We've got the baffle out of the exhaust. It's removable, so it seems to be a lot happier with that. We're going to make a couple of different covers for this can to try different outlet sizes and positions to see if we can get the best pulse going through, and things like that. It's going to be a decent little saw. Let's just see how it starts. Make sure we turn the ignition on. There you have it. Can't argue with that. And there it is. A ported Poulan 2150. Who would have thought? Thanks for watching my port job. We tore it down. We got some numbers. We ported it. We got it back together. We've got it tuned up. Soon we'll get it in some real wood and see how the numbers correlate to performance after the port job. But I can tell you, after doing one of these already a year ago, that guy is working great, working solid. So we'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate all my likes and subscribers. If you haven't subscribed already, please smack that subscribe button, smack that like button. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one. Rock on.